Well, good morning, Chris from Choice. It's great to have you with us today to talk about air cleaners and air purifiers and how they might be relevant for people with asthma. As mentioned, my name's Anthony Flynn. I'm the Senior Manager for Research, Information and Evaluation at Asthma Australia. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Anthony. It's great to be here. I'm Chris Barnes. I'm from Choice. I'm a product category manager for household products at Choice, and I've been looking after our air purifier tests that we've just kicked off in the last year or two.
Fantastic. Well, as I said, thanks for joining us. This is a really interesting topic for discussion for people with asthma, and obviously for Asthma Australia as a result. People with asthma, they've been very interested in the role of air purifiers and air cleaners during times of high air pollution. They obviously are hearing about its protective benefit and how they could protect themselves and their loved ones through effective use of them. So what can you tell us about how air purifiers and air cleaners work to protect people's health? What is it about them? How do they work?
Yeah, look, it's been a bit of a journey for us to learn a bit more about air purifiers. I mean, last year, 2020, was kind of the year of the air purifier with bushfires and then COVID. Suddenly they roared into consumer interest, so that's why we picked up on them. So, I mean, really the job of an air purifier, a domestic air purifier, a home appliance we're talking about here, because of course there is industrial and medical level of air purification, but that's a separate issue. So an air purifier in your home has a fairly simple job. It's basically a fan and a filter with a bit more sophistication added around it, with some displays and information and other things. But it's basically a fan to draw the indoor air through a filter and clean that of dust and smoke particles, fine PM 2.5 level particles, and some other nasties that can be in the air. And then put clean air back out into the indoor air. So that's really a relatively simple job. It's not necessarily a very simple task to achieve well, though. When we test air purifiers, we put them through a range of different tests, and there are some industry standard tests that these are normally put to. There's a test called the CADR, the Clean Air Delivery Rate, which most of them are put to. It's not an entirely realistic simulation of what happens in a home, but it is a standardized type of test which allows you to compare one model against another. So what we test them against are dust particles, smoke, which obviously is something that's been of concern in the last year or so. And we also test them for how well they remove volatile organic compounds, VOCs. Now, there are various other things that an air purifier can tackle. Pollen is an obvious one. Unfortunately, there's a number of technical reasons why we weren't able to get a pollen test to work, because pollen is relatively large particles, and unfortunately they tend to precipitate out of the air too fast to get a good reading. And the way that one of these tests work, whether it's dust or smoke or anything else, is that you set up the test chamber, and you put the pollutant in, whichever it might be, dust, for example, and you figure out how fast the dust precipitates out of the air naturally. What's the natural decay for a set amount of dust to be, when it's put in the room and mixed in, and then you figure out how fast does it precipitate out of the air, and then you set that up again, and you put the the air purifier on, running, and then you see how does that compare against the natural decay. How much faster is the air purifier able to actually get that dust out of the air? And that gives you an idea of how quickly it can process that volume of air in the room. And so we do that for dust, and we do it for smoke, and we do it for volatile organic compounds. And that gives a pretty good comparison over how well one model performs against another.
Great, thanks. That's a really comprehensive explanation and very interesting. And I love, and our audience would be really interested in the rigor of that kind of testing methodology. A little bit more about that, a little bit more about the complexity behind it and the fan and filter concept. What is it about the filter that's different to, say, a filter that I might wear over my mouth or a filter I might use for other purposes that makes it effective in this case?
So, look, there's a number of different filtration technologies that air purifiers use. The main one, and the one that we say is the best way to The best one to look for is the good old HEPA filter, the high efficiency particulate air, which you find in vacuum cleaners, excuse me, and various other products. But that's really the key one for getting good filtration out of an air purifier. And what a HEPA filter is, it's basically an extremely densely woven piece of material, which means that as the air gets blown through it and the dust particles and smoke particles and so on are blown through it, it's such a dense weave of different strands that, that it's almost impossible for a small particle to go through without bumping into one of those strands of material and getting trapped on it. So that's why they're so good at filtering out most of what's in the air. 99.95% of particles down to the size of 0.3 microns, so 0.3 micrometers. That's what a HEPA filter can do. In actual fact, there's studies that show they're actually quite good at filtering particles even smaller than that. So viruses, for example, are much, much smaller than that, 0.3 of a micron. We're talking down to 100 nanometers or less in a lot of cases. So one of the big questions, of course, is can an air purifier protect you from the COVID-19 virus or indeed any other virus? The simple answer is, yeah, they actually can have a role to play. Now, they don't eliminate all the hygiene practices that you have to have in place. You've still got to wash your hands. You've still got to be careful about, wearing a mask in crowded places. All the rules that would normally apply still apply. But in terms of getting a virus out of the indoor air, yeah, the HEPA filter actually can do it. Even though they're not rated for particles of that size. It's because particles so small as that move randomly. They actually get bumped around by the air particles themselves, the molecules of air. And that means that they don't go in a straight line through the filter. They're moving around randomly, which means there's a much higher chance that they're going to bump into the filter at some point and get trapped there. Now, just being on a filter won't kill a virus, but it can't live there forever. It can't survive forever. So by the time you replace that filter, any viruses that have been trapped on it are probably long dead.
Well, that's very interesting and obviously very topical for us at the moment. When we talk about what to look for when purchasing an air filter or an air purifier, aside from the importance of having a HEPA filter, what are the other features? And are there other kinds of filters that are effective ways? That
you'll often find models have more than one filter. So the HEPA filter is one. There's usually a pre-filter which filters out the really coarse pieces of dust, pet hair and things like that, because you don't want to be clogging up your valuable HEPA filter surface area with something that could have just been filtered out with a basic screen. So they usually have some sort of pre-filter on. They might also have a carbon filter. Carbon or charcoal filters are good for filtering out odours and some volatile organic compounds. There are other types of filtration technology. Ionisation is one of them. So an ionisation filter works basically by putting charged particles either out into the room or on a photocatalytic plate of some sort. And what the ionised particle does, it's a charged particle and it attaches itself, it's attracted towards a particle such as a piece of dust or a smoke particle, and then it tends to break it down through chemical interaction, or it causes it to become electrically charged and it gets attracted to that photocatalytic plate, for example. So there's various ways that ionisation works, and there are a few models out there that use it. It certainly can be effective. I would be more relying on one that has a photocatalytic plate rather than one that's simply putting charged particles out into the air and with the idea that somehow they'll trap and break down the dust and particles in the air. Look, in principle that can work, but we still think that the HEPA filter is the way to go. There are a very few that rely on ozone technology, so they put ozone out into the air. We'd strongly recommend that, especially people with asthma, avoid any model that claims to generate ozone. Ozone is a known irritant, breathing irritation, and it's also probably not terribly effective for filtering the air. So there aren't many that generate ozone. If you do find one, I'd be steering clear of that.
Okay, thanks for that. That sounds like a lot of technical information behind some decision making, but clearly some very important stuff that determine the effectiveness. What about when I'm ready to buy one, ready to go and get one, for the reasons that you've talked about? What should I expect to pay? How do I find them? What should I consider? What about maintenance and part replacement?
Yeah, so there are a few things to think about there. In terms of buying them, that's quite easy these days. Most of the major appliance stores have them. The big appliance chains. You don't have to be looking online on specialist stores. There are some online specialist retailers that sell them as well. But look, once you go looking for an air purifier, you're not going to have any trouble at all finding one. So that's the easy bit. Now, as to what price should you pay? Well, you're looking at probably a few $100s. Now, our tests show that, as with most appliances, paying top dollar doesn't guarantee you're getting the best model. Look, that's true of whether it's a fridge or an oven or a vacuum cleaner or an air purifier. Now, we do tend to find the bigger the model, the more powerful the fan, the better it's able to process a large volume of air. So bigger does tend to be better to some extent in terms of just how much, how fast it can clean the air in a room. And certainly if you've got a big room, a big open plan living area, you are going to need to be looking at a bigger unit to effectively process the air there. Most of them have a room rating size that they claim. Now, we haven't tested how accurate that is, but that will give you a guide as to, is this meant to be in a big open plan area? Is it really just for a small bedroom? So that's a feature to look at, a specification to look at as well. So price-wise, you're probably looking at $300, $400, $500 at least. You can certainly pay a lot more than that. But I mean, people can of course have a look at the review on Choice and get an idea of where the price points are. One thing that I would suggest is that there are a few very small models out there on the market, and I would suggest don't bother with those. We just find they don't have the oomph to effectively process the air in a room very, very effectively. So you should really be looking at something a little bit bigger. A floor standing model is probably what you're going to need to have any serious effect in your room. Now, ongoing cost is something to think about as well. I talked about the filters that these things use. The filters do get used up after a while. Some filters, like a carbon or a charcoal filter, you can often take out, and the pre-filter, they can be taken out and cleaned or washed usually, and then put back in. But a HEPA filter can't. You can't wash and reuse a HEPA filter. It's just the way that those things are made. Now, they will last you for quite a long time, but eventually they will clog up. And a lot of the units have a sensor in them to say, look, the HEPA filter needs to be replaced. And it will often tell you, it's time to replace the filter. If they don't have that, then most of them will at least have a recommended time frame as to when you should be expecting to replace the filter. Now, that will depend on how often you use it. Now, if you're an asthma sufferer and you have to be very careful about the quality of the indoor air, you're probably going to be running the air purifier quite a lot, possibly even all day, every day. That's going to use up the filters faster. One way to slow that down would be to only turn it on when you think you really need to. Or leave it running on a low setting, an automatic setting, so that it just kind of ticks along and waits until it senses that there's a high level of pollution in the air, and then it will fire itself up. So look at these different modes and see what might suit you. You want to have a good range of fan speeds, so you can crank it up, when bushfire smoke, for example, has got into the house, or a low, gentle setting for when you're trying to get to sleep at night. But filter costs, do look at what the cost of the filters are. Look at how often you think you're probably going to have to replace them, because we've done some calculations in our review and they do add up quite quickly. If you're even just using the most conservative estimates that each model provided for how often you'd need to replace the filter, on a lot of models, it can add up to hundreds of dollars a year.
Yeah, thank you. They're really important considerations, and considerations that I know will be very very of high priority for people listening to this. What about, so when we're out there looking for and looking to implement an air purifier in our house, I mean, where do we put it? You know, how many do we need? What do we do with the doors and windows? When do we turn it on and off? You touched on it a little bit. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so look, there are very few that I would rely on to process the air in an entire house, unless you've got quite a small house, perhaps. A large unit might be able to do that, but it's a little bit like an air conditioner. I mean, the size is one thing, but physically, can it even get the air out of the distant room that you're hoping it will also cover? You know, the air conditioner that's in your living room technically might have the capacity to cool, you know, the whole house, but physically it just can't blow the air in every direction. So an air purifier is the same. If you've got a big open living room and perhaps, you know, a couple of bedrooms, and you want to process the air in all of those, you might be looking at a unit for each space. So perhaps a big unit for the open plan living area and a small unit for the bedrooms. A lot of these are reasonably portable, so you may have the option of moving it from room to room as you need to, but you might not want to have a big unit in the living room that you then try and wheel into the bedroom. It just might be a bit big, a bit noisy. Now, most of them are fairly quiet on their lowest fan setting, so that could still be a practical option, because noise is definitely something you want to take into account here. I've got one myself. I don't suffer from asthma, fortunately, but I did buy an air purifier myself just to see what it's like living with one. And they are very noisy. They can be very noisy on their high fan settings, but also very, very quiet on their lowest fan settings. So that's definitely, noise is definitely something to think about. I mean, an interesting anecdote that I can provide is that I often leave mine running on an automatic setting. So it sits there very quietly, not really doing a great deal at all, but it's got a sensor running, trying to pick up, has the level of pollutants in the room increased. Fortunately, most of the time that doesn't happen, but occasionally bushfire smoke gets into the house. And, you know, there's been a couple of times in the wee hours of the morning where I've heard the thing roar into life in the living room and realised, oh, I can smell smoke. You know, okay, so smoke's in the air, better close up the house. When the air outside is the problem, simple logic says close up the house. Don't let the outside air get in. That's an obvious one in bushfire season. Once the air outside is nice and clean, then open the doors and windows, let the air inside recirculate a bit. But cooking fumes are another source of particulates in the air and irritations. We know from recent news that gas cooking, the waste products from gas, burning gas, can be a source of irritation for breathing. So that's a factor to think about if you've got a gas cooktop. But just the fumes from the cooking itself can get into the air. And again, I've found my air purifier roar into life when I've been frying sausages or whatever on the cooktop, because suddenly there's this mass of smoke. Not enough smoke that you would worry about. It's not enough smoke to set off the smoke alarm, but it's enough that it could be an irritation for someone who's got susceptibility in that area. And certainly my air purifier has picked it up. So it's been quite educational, just even having that sensor that most of them do have, showing you what it thinks of the air purity in your room at the time. That could be quite an eye-opener, I suspect, for a lot of people as to how that can vary.
That's very interesting, Chris. In your experience, do the products come with instructions like you've just described?
Yeah, usually the instructions are pretty good, and the sensors that are on them, to show the air quality, can be pretty basic. And I wouldn't guarantee that they're 100% accurate, but they are an interesting indication and often a useful indication of just what's going on inside your house at the time. Now, while they're good at filtering out dust and so on, they can only filter out what's in the air that passes through them at the time. My air purifier has not stopped me having to vacuum and dust my house. That seems to be just as dusty as ever. Once dust or any other pollution has settled onto a surface, it's not in the air anymore. It's totally obvious. And the air purifier can't really do anything much about it. So whether it's dust or smoke particles or VOCs that have settled into your furniture, or even viruses that have settled onto surfaces, the air purifier can't really deal with those anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Look, that covered the next question was around, how much does it replace what we need to do in terms of regular maintenance? But I think it's very clear that we need to continue, the hygiene, the cleaning, the dusting to avoid those.
I think the air purifier can definitely enhance air quality inside the house, but it's not going to stop, those routine jobs, unfortunately. To me, its real strength is in dealing with the things that we don't have any other way to deal with, and smoke inside the house is a good example. When there's smoke getting in from outside, in bushfire season, for example, as I mentioned, what can you do? You can't open the windows to blow it out because that's where it's coming in from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real strength of what an air purifier can actually do. You can close it up, it can actually deal with that pollution in the air, which probably you would have just had to put up with otherwise.
Yeah, thank you. Look, that brings me to the end of the questions that I've prepared. I mean, for us, the takeouts are that the indoor air pollution can be derived from a number of sources. That an air purifier can be very effective in protecting occupants of indoor spaces from the effects of these gases, these air pollutants, but they have to be good quality ones, and usually that means that it comes with a filter that's verified to be effective at filtering the pollution, and a HEPA filter is probably something we can fix to memory that does that job. An air purifier can't do everything, and considerations of the size of the room and the size of the space and the various spaces of a house need to be considered, and in consideration of what kind of purifiers we need and what the costs will be. We have to think about the ongoing maintenance, replacing products, and that can be a non insignificant burden on families and people to keep an eye on. But was there any other things you want to sort of reinforce there, Chris, that we'd missed, or that you thought were really important to recap?
Look, I think we've covered the main things. I mean, it does come down to a reasonably simple decision, at least in terms of what to look for. HEPA filter, replacement cost of the filters, what's the size of the unit, what sort of rooms it meant to deal with. Those are the basic things. I will just give one interesting finding that we had with testing volatile organic compounds. As I said, most air purifiers actually can't deal with these terribly effectively, but some can. But even those that were managing to filter some out, we found in our tests, while we're experimenting with the right levels of VOCs to put in the air for the test and so on, something that was noticed that what they'll often do is that whatever filter is capturing that, whether it's a carbon filter or a more specialised filter, will capture the VOCs, but left to its own devices, the VOCs can off-gas back out of the filter back into the room again.
Right.
Once the filter's been saturated. So one of the tips there is that if, let's say you've just painted the house and you think, I'll let the air purifier deal with it because I know that it can. Once you've cleared the air of some of that VOCs, you really want to take the unit or the filter outside and let it off gas outside, rather than let all that hard work go to waste and let it all just seep out back into the room again.
Oh, that's a really important tip, something probably that we wouldn't have thought of had we not heard it from you. Thanks, Chris. It's really been instructive, informative, really helpful and practical. For us at Asthma Australia, if we're here to help answer questions, help people with asthma and their carers gain control and reduce the burden that they experience due to asthma. So if any of our discussion today has raised any questions, or you want to know a little bit more, we would welcome to hear. We would be grateful to hear from you via our social media or helpline at Asthma Australia. And Chris, I guess you'd be happy for consumers to have a look at the reviews on the Choice website.
Yes, absolutely. And look, if this has helped anyone who has asthma or any other breathing conditions or just general susceptibility to hay fever or anything else, then I'm really pleased to have been able to help. You can look at the reviews that we've done. You do need to be usually need to be a member, of course, to see the reviews on our site. But I think we've arranged for Asthma Australia to people to be able to click through and see the reviews. But the buying guide for air purifiers is free to read. That's all the buying guides on our website, and there's a lot of other general advice out there as well on our website. So I hope that that's useful for Asthma Australia members to have a look at and learn from.
Great. I bet it will be. Well, thanks again for your time, and I hope it's been helpful for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.